Welcome everyone to IoT and IP Explained. My name is Claudia Tapia and I have the pleasure to moderate this podcast where together with experts around the world, we explore the different aspects of the Internet of Things and its interaction with intellectual property rights. Today, I would like to start with a figure, 12.8 billion. This is the number of cellular connections, including licensed cellular IoT, according to the GSM Association, known as GSMA. As we have learned in our past podcast episodes, connectivity enhances all kinds of sectors: agriculture, automotive, energy, education, health, you name it. And each generation of cellular standards like 4G and 5G takes around 10 years to develop, a massive R&D investment. This is why it's usually the case that essential technology to the standard is protected by patents. I'm talking about standard essential patents or SEPs. The good news is that SEPs are typically available on fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory or FRAND terms. FRAND is usually determined by the parties in bilateral good faith licensing negotiations. However, sometimes parties use other platforms like patent pools, where some companies pool their SEP portfolios in one place and license one or more of these patents to each other or to third parties. We talk about this one-stop shopping because the licensee can obtain via the pool a license for several SEP portfolios without having to negotiate bilaterally with each SEP owner, and this saves transaction costs to both the SEP owners and the SEP users. In the last years, we have seen increasing concerns from the European Commission regarding implementation of the IoT. Will the companies entering the IoT who are not familiar with FRAND be able to negotiate FRAND licenses? With this in mind, they started several initiatives. One of them was the creation of an expert group on standard essential patents. Unfortunately, the group was unable to find consensus on any single proposal made, but they could present in 2021 a list of proposals, some of which had more or less support. And one of those proposals, the number 75, was called collective licensing negotiation groups, or LNGs. And it seems that sometime later, a few companies, automotive companies, have prepared a similar proposal called Automotive Licensing Negotiation Group, or ALNG, and asked the German Carter office to review it, which led to a letter that has been recently published. Now, we are going to discuss today LNGs with Dr. Bowman Heiden. He was one of the members of the European Commission expert group on a standard essential patent. He holds degrees in engineering, technology management, and economics, and he has several positions, such as the director of the Center for Intellectual Property, CIP, at the University of Gothenburg, and the executive director at the Tertiary Strategic Initiative for Technology Leadership at UC Berkeley, and many other titles, which I encourage you to read in the bio link. Bo, this is such a pleasure. Welcome.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Tapia. It's good to be here with you today. We'll go informal for now. Claudia and Bo, is that good? All right. Yeah, it's great to be here. I look forward to discussing this. I know that the idea of license negotiation groups are a bit controversial. And I know that when I was working with the expert group, we threw out a lot of different ideas, and this is one of the ones that's been picked up on. But I think the key thing is that most types of institutional structures, whether they're patent pools or SDOs or any type of institution, can be designed in a way. And of course, one thing that I've spoken about is a little bit counterintuitive. So I'd like to talk to you about that today.
Very good. And I look forward to that. Maybe we can start with a question related to this proposal. Are we looking for solutions when we haven't detected a problem? So why is there potentially a need for solutions?
Right, that's a good question. And I always raise this in the beginning. You raise this big number as well. I always raise the issue that that for the most part, FRAND-enabled standards that are used today in telecommunications have been very successful. You know, we have in cellular mobile, we have more subscriptions than people on the planet, trillions of dollars of value created. People work together rather well. I mean, it's an extremely collective organizational structure from beginning. It's quite impressive. I think we skip over that. As an engineer, I'm always impressed that you can get, you know, hundreds of people from different organizations together to spend lots of time to put something like this complicated together. I mean, it's up there on the level of going to the moon. And so we kind of take that for granted and move on to the next step. And I think it's always important to know that what we've accomplished here together through a lot of hard work, because there are a lot of challenges, and that's what we'll discuss a bit, and things could possibly be improved. But it's hard to use the word failure in the market failure sense that economists use in the way that most people consider to be failure, because it's obviously extremely successful, and we want to build on that success. It's always good to test out new ideas as long as they do improve things. And, you know, from an economics perspective, we would want a Pareto efficiency, as we would say. We want everyone to improve, not there to be, you know, a trade-off where some people improve and some people don't.
I think this is a very good approach. I remember you wrote an article with Igor Nikolic and Ruth Peters on the topic of LNGs. I'm not sure whether the audience know what LNGs are. So I think it will be great if you present the idea and maybe also the key takeaways from this article.
Sure. Yeah, no one really knows what an LNG is. That's the interesting part, right? The idea of license negotiation groups is new. And that's a bit what our paper was about, is that because it's new, we can design it the way we want to. You know, the argument typically for a license negotiation group that makes implementers want to gather together is that they believe that they can get a better deal. You know, the underlying idea is that the patent holders have come together, and now we need to come together because they're asking for more money than they should, so to speak. That would be the argument. So, but what we argue in our paper is that it's actually a great way to solve the patent holdout issue, right? Because what patent holders want is to be able to license the whole market as quickly as possible. And what implementers really want, even better than maybe a discount through collective bargaining, is that they would like everyone to pay at the same time, because nobody wants to pay. No one wants to pay first, right? No one wants to be put at a disadvantage. So this collective action problem in economics is quite problematic here, especially if you're working with actors with low margins who, if they paid first, would be put at a disadvantage on the market compared to competitors. So there is an incentive on both sides here to try to get everyone together on one side and everyone together on the other side and agree on a FRAND royalty where everyone is able to license from all the licensors and all the licensees at one time. I think that even though the system is working well, as we described, this, of course, would be an improvement if it could be accomplished. But there's challenges. But the good news is when you ask the question, what is an LNG? Well, it's what we decide to make it, right?
We're talking about the interests of both sides. And I was thinking SCP owners want to have the licenses, but they also want to make sure it's FRAND, because with those revenues, they reinvest in the research and development that leads to the next generation of the standard. So on the other hand, I do see your point on having platforms that facilitate negotiation and this big challenge that we also see with implementers, which I don't want to be the first one paying. Having said that, we see also the vast majority of cases being licensed on good faith bilateral negotiations. But if we can find a platform that improves the situation, excellent for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, so the question would be, where do you start, right? We already have norms about licensing in mobile. There's bilateral negotiations seem to work well. We just said we have more subscriptions than we have people. But maybe in these new areas, right? And maybe the long tail actors who are not aware of how SCP licensing has worked in new verticals, new use cases, maybe this would allow them to, who are maybe more concerned about making sure that all their competitors are licensed, and also for the SEP holders who have a transaction cost problem of trying to reach out to all these different actors. This could be a good place to start in some way. So maybe you could make an argument that LNGs are not necessary everywhere, but there's some places I think they would be beneficial for both actors, especially if you can get out ahead of the curve, right? Into new areas and get people gathered and understand how this works and create this mechanism in the way that you want to before there's a lot of market activity where implementers start using the standard without knowing what they might need to pay and how they would do it. That always causes a problem later on when they understand what's going on. So I think here the LNG could also be an educational actor to bring everyone together, which I see as one of the big problems when you move into new fields. And I think this is one of the big issues in automotive, is that not only is it a price an issue, but the norms of how automotive works were very different than telecom.
You were talking, for example, about the different rules in licensing. And I think what you mean is this tradition from automotive where the automotive manufacturers had their suppliers taking those deals, the companies, tier 1 and tier 2. Whereas in telecom, the commercial practice is to license to the end user. In this case, will be the automotive manufacturers. So that was this crash between the sectors. So one thing that you mentioned is the fact that implementers start using a technology without knowing how much they have to pay. And this is a challenge we have from the beginning, because front is the value of this standardized technology to the end product. Now, I don't think there's typically the practice of implementers saying, okay, I'm using something which is not mine, so I'm going to put money aside to make sure that when I'm getting certain value out of it, they know themselves which is the value, and at least to keep a piece of that aside. Instead of later come as shocking that someone who is the owner of that technology is asking for the revenues. But I do understand the challenge, how much you put aside and to whom to pay. So these are all these aspects where platforms could help.
Yeah, so the platform perspective, I mean, I wrote a paper on incentivizing around the prisoner's dilemma in SEP licensing with Gustav Brismark, and that was about platforms. And it's the same thinking, right? Can you get all the actors on both sides, the sellers and the buyers, together to agree and license, everybody all at once? That would be, that would reduce the transaction costs. And if, the negotiation could be frank. I mean, to a lot of actors, I believe that the price, while everyone always haggles over price, if the price is reasonable and everyone pays it at the same time, and it's something that could be passed on to the consumer because they're already receiving a lot of value, it's really not an issue from an economic perspective for these actors. It's only when they pay at a different rate. And I think that's the issue too. Now, you mentioned if actors don't know exactly who to pay and how much, and then you would like them to at least understand that they need to, and they should put some money in escrow maybe, but that means they have to add add on to the price of the product, and they're not going to do that if everyone else is not doing it. It comes back to that same issue, right? That no one's going to do this thing if everyone else isn't doing it. They're private ordered, right? An LNG is a private mechanism. A patent pool is a private mechanism. A regulation by the state is not a private mechanism, right? So I tend to like anything that's private, but it should be designed in a way that it allows for the positive effects without minimizing any negative effects. Mm-hmm. That's why I think that LNGs can be designed to be useful or to be irrelevant, which is the same for patent pools. Patent pools either succeed and they're useful, or they don't succeed and they're irrelevant.
I see now platforms like Avanti, one example of very successful market solution that I think some years ago we would not have thought about.
Yeah, so, I mean, to me, it's perfect. I mean, if you go back to cellular and mobile, you don't have these pools. In IoT, if you consider automotive, I consider anything other than mobile phones to be things. So IoT. Then everyone on the one side got together and produced a one-stop shop, which is what people are asking for on the implementer side. And Avanci did operate as this kind of platform actor. But I agree that these types of platforms are important. We saw this, my co-author, Ruth Peters, with the One Blue pool, was able to talk to the industry association and get get a lot of actors to sign up all at once to the One Blue patent pool. So you have examples of this, again, private transactions where private actors get together and they negotiate. And if they agree, it's good for everyone, by definition. And if they don't agree, then we can always default back to bilateral or other types of structures. What you don't want is for this to take too long, right? So maybe there should be a time limit.
But what I hear too is the need for the implementer to understand this is a front offer, which usually we get through these good faith licensing agreements and negotiations with technical discussions, showing, with these claim charts, but not all the players are having these possibilities to understand what front is. So I'm not so concerned about these large companies with their great legal departments and being able to hire very experienced smaller companies, new entrants. You were talking about this. We can create what is LNGs. Maybe we need to give it a new name, not to confuse to the original proposal, to the proposal of automotive recently. But in this BOW licensing group, what would be your ideal platform? How would that work?
Right. So I think that's a good way to think in platforms. Can it be, we want platforms of buyers and sellers. Does it need to be one platform of buyers and one platform of sellers that negotiate, or can the thing be run as a platform? These are different mechanisms, and we see that. So I think that's the right way to think. If we have already a group of people over here of sellers in a patent pool, and then we want to get everyone together because we believe that if we want to speed this up, right, then one thing that's slowing it down is that nobody wants to go first. Then maybe we can allow this to happen. Then how would you design it? Well, I think that the aggregate amount of these actors could be a discussion, right? Should it be just the long tail of people that have a small market share? I'm not sure that that's necessarily such an issue because there's already a contractual agreement on to license under FRAND. So I think it's not such a big problem to have bigger actors because you want everyone in the whole market to participate. Now, one of the things that you probably want is people to be similarly situated, right? So the heterogeneity is one of the problems. One of the issues when people say that, well, an LNG will be all these actors will get together and then they'll act as a cartel. I think the one thing that people forget is that even on the implementer side, not everyone is homogeneous. The most likely result of creating an LNG is that the implementers won't agree themselves, which has been a similar problem on the patent pool side for many years, right? So the best way to make an LNG work is that you have people that are similarly situated on the market and in the value chain. That would be one way to make it easier. You could, of course, put a limit on the amount of market share in the whole group, but I don't think that that's actually useful in what we're trying to achieve, given the collective nature of SEP licensing, starting with SDOs through FRAND, through pools. I think the LNG members should be able to share information within the group about essentiality and validity, infringement, these issues, but they shouldn't be able to share opinions and conclusions. They shouldn't. So you have to manage this in the same way that patent pools are managed. They shouldn't be able to share information about market shares and pricing, of course. That's the thing that most people would be concerned about. You definitely need to have somebody there at the meetings that is a very diligent antitrust counsel, making sure that this is done properly. You could, of course, do this formally or informally. I think both work. And as we mentioned before, I think that just like with patent pools, people should be allowed to negotiate bilaterally. But once they've committed to a pool or license negotiation group, they shouldn't be able to opt out in the end. In the same way that for a patent pool, you can always negotiate bilaterally. But if you're in the pool and someone wants to take a pool license, you're obligated to participate in that. The same thing on LNG, because if you could participate in these negotiations and then just opt out of the pool, Now we're back to the collective action problem that we had before. So once the actors together agree to be part of this pool, and that's why they will bicker among themselves, then they have to commit. And that's part of the issue, right? And part of that commitment is actually positive, because if you can get them all together and you have everyone all together here and you can negotiate, and either you find something that works well for everyone, or it just goes back to the way that it was. So I think that that you can design this in a way that is either positive or irrelevant, which is a very good private mechanism, actually. The goal, as I think people are worried about, is that I don't think it can drive down prices because there's a FRAND level that you can't drive down below. And there's different courts around the world that will, that will adjudicate that. What you don't want is for this to take more time. The argument, I guess I'm making, is that possibly it will speed things up, especially when it comes to licensing the whole market. So my suggestion is it could be worth a shot if designed properly.
If designed properly. And I think you raise a very good point. As a patent owner or as an implementer, you cannot go into this cherry picking, meaning I'm going to take the best of each model so that I am the one getting the best of it and the other doesn't. Because if you don't create a platform that is somehow a win-win, you're not going to have parties participating and it's not going to get successful. So I think that is one of the flaws that we saw with these proposals for automotive LNGs, that they wanted to create that platform, but then not been binding. I don't see really incentive for implementers to take a license in this constellation. What I hear from your proposal is that you will have these two platforms, let's say a patent pool for patent owners and this new platform for implementers, in which they will have similar safeguards in terms of antitrust, where you will get for the implementer side only similar situated players. So I imagine that for certain technology, you will have several licensee groups being formed that they will negotiate with the administrator from the other side.
Exactly, and that could be, and you see that in courts, right, where the courts, and I think everyone has kind of agreed that non-discriminatory means similarly situated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And anytime you want a collective group of people to get together, they all have to have very similar interests.
Mm-hmm.
If you put let's say you mixed automotive actors together, they might not work well because they're like, well, you're a fancy, $100,000 car and I'm a $20,000 car. Why should I pay the same? That might not be an argument that the SEP licensors agree with, but you can see even the bickering among the implementers themselves, right? So you have these problems of creating platforms between the two groups, but you also have them within the group. And that's why they're often difficult to form. But I think they're worthwhile to form, especially as the amount of actors that are going to be SEP holders and SEP licensees increases. It makes sense to try to solve this in a better way as we go forward.
And you mentioned also the relevance for this to be a private initiative and not being regulated. I think this is also key in the sense that when you have something which is voluntary and is running in parallel of what we have right now, we know it's a good idea because it works. The market accepts that.
Exactly.
And when you build a proposal which is totally unbalanced, the market, and when I say unbalanced, this could go in both directions, then the market doesn't include it. So I think this is definitely key.
If you call something a patent pool that's done privately, that's completely different than a government mandated patent pool. Even if you use the same word, because a private patent pool has to be negotiated, otherwise it doesn't work. So if it works, it has to be agreed. But a government mandated patent pool, it's really just price setting, right? But it's called a patent pool. So it's always important to understand that it's a very big difference between publicly ordered and privately ordered mechanisms. And I tend to always like to see private ordered mechanisms wherever they are, if possible.
If possible. I understand that this initiative will be voluntary, and this is kind of an additional platform for players to choose. One of the things that I have seen in This is totally personal opinion, but
Sure.
I have seen situations where some implementers have been delaying successfully negotiations for many, many years. You see the patent owner suing that bad faith implementer, and for whatever reasons, maybe the courts didn't understand very well the portfolio. The end result, the front royalty, need to be lower than those who have negotiated in good faith at the beginning.
Right.
How can we make sure that this system incentivizes good faith implementers? Because I always thought, yes, you have this dilemma, right? You don't want to pay before your competitors pay. And when I said competitors, I'm thinking of similar situated parties. But what if you get an early bird discount that we have seen, for example, in Avanci now, that you say, okay, I'm going to pay because I'm going to get a better deal. And
Right.
for that, you also need a system that later on support that, because otherwise,
Right.
it doesn't matter what we privately come out with if at the end we see that the price is still getting a better deal by misbehaving. What do you think about this situation? How can we make sure this is working properly and good faith actors are getting a better deal?
No, that's a great question, Claudia, and it's not intuitive. I think that, for example, that if somebody pays early a certain royalty amount and then someone pays late the same amount, that's discrimination against the person who paid earlier. So non-discrimination isn't that people pay the same, is that people have to pay the same in the same time period. Just in the same way that non-discrimination is related to similarly situated actors. You have to also pay similarly situated in time. And so what ends up happening is that if you don't discriminate against people who pay late, then you're discriminating against people that pay early. And that has to be part of the process. In economics, it's quite clear. I think there's room for it in the legal systems. I came up with this. This is the entertaining part of our discussion. Our added bonus part is that I came up with this new idea. I rebranded FRAND into reasonable and discriminatory is fair, RADIF. To try to drive, it hasn't taken off yet. Maybe this is the chance with the podcast.
Not yet.
but it does, even though it's a little silly on one hand, it does make a point that if something needs to be reasonable and has to be discriminated properly in order to be fair, right? Because fairness in the end of the day is the key. If people pay early, then they have to have a better situation than people pay late. And that can be done through, like you said, early bird activities. And of course, this is all trying to overcome the collective action problem, right? You're trying to get people to sign up early, incentivize them. So you won't incentivize people to do this if there isn't a penalty for being late. And that either has to happen through the private mechanism or by the court. The court also has to say, well, you've waited a lot longer than other people. I don't want to discriminate against those who paid early. So you should have to pay more. And that seems completely reasonable. What you would want to hope with platforms or LNGs is that you can avoid that by getting everybody to agree and pay together at the same moment in time. So you would overcome that issue. But I do agree that that is an important issue and that the system hasn't handled that. So as you're saying, if I can wait and pay the same as if I'd paid right away, then why wouldn't I wait? It comes down to this idea that I raised in a recent paper about holdout, that maybe there's such a thing as good faith and bad faith holdout. In other words, are you holding out because you don't want to pay in bad faith? Or are you holding out because you don't want to be disadvantaged by paying before someone else? And that seems completely rational. And when something's rational, that's when a mechanism needs to solve it.
I
Does that
see
make
you're
sense?
using holding up when others use hold out. But I think
Yeah.
because of the article that you wrote with
Right.
Nicola, but basically I understand you're saying that as an implementer, you have maybe two possibilities to delay these negotiations. One, because you're doing all your best to reduce the fees or even avoid paying. And the other one is that you're uncertain is that front? Am I going to be the first one paying? So this kind of platform would be kind of this safe space for you. Even having similar situated licenses, we might be in the situation very powerful companies in one platform. So the risk of collusion is, in some scenarios, really, really high. And that's why it's so important to work on these safeguards. You were talking about having an antitrust expert in each of the meetings, reducing, limiting the kind of discussions that they will have together. I imagine also having more bilateral discussions between the parties in that platform and the, let's call it, administrator, instead of sitting all together in the room and talking.
Right. That might be better, not to bring everyone together in one place. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that will help. And also being careful what the administrator is sharing with the rest. We know that, for example, essentiality claim charts are confidential because this belongs to the property of the patent owners. They are confidentiality clauses signed. So what will be shared with that, which purpose, and really finding a platform that brings both sides together, allowing the patent owner to negotiate with the platform, but also being maybe in a kind of pool representing patent owners, although we know that many patent owners are also patent users. So if you are you going to be in both sides? How is it going to work? You know, we get the more we go into the details, the more complex this thing will come.
Yeah, I think these are all very good points. And I think we wrote about IoT, which I think is a little cleaner in the sense that most of the implementers and SEP holders are different actors. That might not always be the case going forward, but right now they're very clean. And so it's possible, I think, to do that easier. But all the points you made are very good. But you can see what I'm kind of getting at is that if there's a rationale, a business rationale that you don't want to pay before someone else pays, that's something that's structural that needs to be overcome. And everybody should want to try to find a way to overcome that and separate that from the behavior where people in bad faith are just trying to avoid payment altogether.
I see. Well, Bo, thank you so much for sharing this new idea, this Bo licensing group for implementers. And before you leave, I would love to ask you one question, which I typically ask to my guests, which is whether you could share a lesson learned.
Yeah, so I think the thing that I learned, I started out as an engineer. As an engineer, we like to have problems that have answers that you circle, right? Like on a test, we circle the answer. That's the answer, right? And that is the answer. That's the amount of the temperature or the current or that is an answer. It's consistent. It's possible to do. But as I moved into strategic management and then into economics and then law and economics, you start to move into this social science world where the world is being designed by different actors with different interests, right? People that work in the government have interests, people that work at companies have interests. And you can't look at these problems as if there is a specific answer, a natural science solution to everything. You have to find ways to get people with different interests to work together, find compromises, which means that everything is not going to be 100% efficient, but that doesn't stop it from being very effective. So I think that's the thing that I learned through all this, and I think that's very valuable in all parts of life when you have to try to work collectively.
This is a great recommendation or lesson learned. I think it works very nicely with the topic of today, because I think we see sometimes proposals that are very one-sided and how they fail miserable in the market, and the solutions that we have seen succeeded are those that they had in mind this win-win situation. Paul, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your expertise, experience, and let's see how this proposal leads us in the future. and look forward to our next discussion. And thank you so much also the audience. As always, comments welcome. Please feel free to send them to ipwithclaudiatapia@hotmail.com or just in LinkedIn under Claudia-Tapia. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye.